All right. Well, we are wrapping up our time with the Abrahamic Covenant. We have looked at Genesis 12, 1 through 3. The second encounter, Genesis 12, verse 7. We've looked at Genesis 13, the third encounter. We've seen the fourth encounter, which was Genesis 15, verses 1 through 21. And then easy to remember, just the odd chapter next, chapter 17, which is the circumcision chapter. Easy to remember that one. Also verses 1 through 21. So for chapter 15, 1 through 21, chapter 17, 1 through 21. Easy to remember. And the final encounter, the sixth encounter, okay, the fifth echo of the initial splash into the pond, we find in Genesis 22. Genesis 22 recounts what is called in Jewish circles, it's called by its Hebrew name, the Akedah, which is the binding, the story of the binding. And most of us are familiar with the story of the binding. And, you know, if you're not familiar with the story of God telling Abraham to take his son, whom he loved, and go sacrifice him on Mount Moriah, well, then shame on you, get out. You know the story. And you know that Abraham went to bind his son Isaac on the altar. And, of course, Abraham is elevated in years by this point in time. Many people think, because of maybe the movies or what have you, they think of Isaac on the altar, they think of him as a child. He's minimum age 13. Minimum age 13. Maximum age 37. Okay? We don't know. Okay? I mean, there are certain little tent pegs that, okay, that's Abraham's at this age, and Abraham at age 99, whatever. We don't exactly know how old Isaac, but he's not a child. Oh, thank you, sir. Yeah, thank you. Oh, that's good. Now they're going to think I have a drinking problem here. All right. But Isaac is, anyway, not a child. He's at least a strapping young teenager. And, of course, the question always was, how did Isaac get on that altar? And how did that altar on Mount Moriah, how did it get built? I mean, Abraham is elevated in years. You got a young, healthy son in front of you. You know he's doing the majority of the work. Abraham is the servant as the foreman. Move this one over here and put that one on top. But when it comes down to getting Isaac onto the altar, is it conceivable that Abraham hog-tied him to the altar? Pardon the pun, for a Jewish story. But Isaac had to lay himself down on that altar. Okay. Isaac had to offer himself to be bound hand and foot on that altar. Abraham's winning no wrestling contests at this time. There is wrestling in the wrestling is a holy sport, by the way, is wrestling in the Bible. We'll see it shortly. But so next time you turn on the wrestling on the TV, don't feel badly. It's you're just a religious service for you with the right perspective. But Abram goes to sacrifice his son, and the voice from heaven cries out. It says, Abraham, Abraham. What is it, Lord? Do not lay a hand on your son. Do not sacrifice. But you told me to sacrifice, but no, I'm countermanding that information. There's a substitute available. It's a sufficient substitute to pay the price that was owed by Abraham and Isaac. And that ram was caught by its horns in the thicket, and they sacrificed that animal in substitution for Isaac. It's known as vicarious atonement. And the angel of the Lord called to Abram a second time from heaven, verse 15 of chapter 22. And here's that final Abrahamic covenant encounter. And the voice said, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord. That's how we know the angel of the Lord is not just an angel. It is our God. It is our covenant God. And he said, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord. Well, didn't Jesus tell us don't swear by this, don't swear by that, because don't swear by your head. Which of you has the ability to turn one gray hair brown? And to which I want to introduce you to a $15 box I can buy at the drugstore. But nonetheless, we don't get to swear because we simply don't have the ability. We don't have the power to back up our oaths, and so it's not allowed for us. On the other hand, for God has the ability to swear, but he's got to swear on something that is above all, that is certain. And compared to the Lord, in the context of the Lord, there is nothing greater in which to swear, by which to swear. And so that is why he says, by myself, on myself, my identity as the Lord of heaven and earth, by myself I have sworn. There is no more certain issue in the history of the universe than God himself. And so he says, by myself. And in fact, we only see this kind of phrase very uncommonly. We only see it a few times. Okay. And whenever we see this phrase, we can absolutely say that what is about to follow is certain. You can take it to the bank. Okay. In fact, you take it to the heavenlies. Okay. Sometimes God speaks, and he's willing to change his mind. 40 days are proclaimed for Nineveh. But was Nineveh just not at that point? No, God changed his mind. But once God, so sometimes God's open to a little negotiation, a little heavenly negotiation, a little argument, right? Will you destroy Sodom for 50, for 40, for 30? Do I hear 20? But when God says, by myself I have sworn, there's no future negotiations. This is certain. Okay. It says, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord. So you've done this thing. You've not withheld your son, your only son. Indeed, I will greatly bless you. Reminds me about Genesis 12, 1 through 3. And I will greatly multiply your seed. Reminds me of Genesis 12, 1 through 3. And also Genesis 13. I will multiply your seed as the stars of the heavens. Oh, I've seen that. I saw that in Genesis chapter 15. And as the sand which is on the sea. Oh, I've seen that. That's Genesis 13. On the sand which is on the seashore. And your seed shall possess, this is new, your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies. This ties into nations will come forth from you, and kings will come forth from those nations. When it says, however, that your seed shall possess the gate of your enemies, it means that these nations and these kings will be very successful. It's part and parcel of the Abrahamic covenant. Verse 18, in your seed, all the nations, all the families, same word, peoples, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, good things attributed toward them, and your seed, because in your seed shall possess the gate of your enemy. In your seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. Galatians 3:16. Paul takes this argument, the conclusion of the Abrahamic covenant with God, Abraham's covenant with God. Paul takes this argument and quotes this very passage. And his argument is not merely that the nations will be blessed through the Jewish people, but by a specific Jewish person, the Messiah, right? And I was, right? Trying to be dramatic. See, I'm telling you, it's so hot. Yeah, all right. All right. Oh, brother, now I've lost my place. Oh, I see what you've done to me. All right. J'accuse. Thank you. 3:16 in Galatians. I always thought that was a silly argument from Paul in my youth. Say, Paul, you know that the word for seed, zerah in Hebrew, it can be singular, as in a singular seed, what he's arguing, but it also can be plural. So you're arguing a grammatical point. The way it reads in Hebrew, it is most likely plural. But yes, it could be. And it's not that Paul's arguing poorly. He's arguing cleverly. I just didn't see the nuance that he was arguing there. He's using the language to demonstrate that baked into the recipe of the Abrahamic covenant is the promise of the Messiah. You know, our Messiah, he said to his disciples after his resurrection, he said, "Oh, you so slow to learn. Do you not know that all that has been written about me must take place," right? All that is written in the law and in the prophets and in the not some, not a little bit, not most, but all. And it tells us that he beginning with the law, he began to expound to his disciples all the passages of the Hebrew Bible, the law, the prophets, the writings that spoke of him. So, if we're looking to see what he was talking about, we have to look and we have to understand that our Messiah is in the Abrahamic covenant. If the Messiah is not in the covenant, then it was a very short conversation that he had with his disciples as he gave them an overview, verse by verse by verse. All right. So that is the end and the accumulation of the Abrahamic covenant as established with Abraham. But what happens after that? We know already Isaac has been born, and Ishmael, his older brother, and God has already made it clear that to Abraham that Ishmael is not the child of promise. It is Isaac who is the child of promise. But it needs to be made clear to Isaac that he is the child of promise. And so we've got to go to chapter 24. And this is actually in preparation for Isaac's adulthood and marriage. This is Abraham is sending his servant. This is the understanding that Abraham. Sometimes, you know, all you get is a conversation between the Lord and between whoever he's talking to, be it Moses, be it Abraham, be it David, be it Samuel, whoever it may be. And all is recorded is the conversation. But you never get insight into, well, what difference did that make in the practical life of the one to whom God spoke? What was that person's understanding? We see Abram's understanding beginning in verse 6 of chapter 24. Abram sending his servant. Oh, we don't want any of these local gals. Okay, we want somebody from the extended family. So the servant has got to go and find the right. Well, this is the original Match.com. Okay, this is old style, old school. Okay, and Abram said to him, "Beware, you do not take my son back there. Make sure that you bring the girl here." Okay, so we're not going to bring my son there. We're bringing the girl home. Verse 7: The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house, and from the land of my birth, who spoke to me and who swore to me, saying, to your descendants I will give this land. He will send his angel before you, and you will take a wife for my son from there. You are bringing him here because this is his land. You're taking her from it. Don't bring my son there. My son has no part in that land. There's no relationship. There's no promise. Nothing. My son has a promise. And this is his land, as Abram understands. To your descendants, I will give this land. Well, let's see how the Lord deals with Isaac specifically in chapter 26. Speaking about taking a break from the land, it's a famine in the land. Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. And in this territory of the Philistines, the Lord finally appears to Isaac. Wait a long time. Isaac is well into adulthood at this point. But we've never seen an encounter between God and, well, but of course, we didn't see an encounter with Abraham and the Lord until Abraham was 75. So it shouldn't surprise us that sometimes God waits several decades before making direct contact. The Lord appeared to him and said, don't go down to Egypt. Stay in the land of which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you. Personal relationship. And I will bless you. Back to Isaiah, to Genesis 12, 1 through 3. For you and to your descendants, I will give all, not some, not most, not a little bit. I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath which I swore to your father Abraham. So, that which I promised your father Abraham, I am also extending to you. And it is one thing to hear the promise secondhand from your father, but now you're hearing directly from my mouth that this is certain. The land is yours. I'm giving it to you, to your descendants, all the lands, and everything that I promised Abraham, I am going to deliver to you and to your descendants. Verse 4, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven. Genesis 15, also Genesis 22. Right? It's like the greatest hits of the Abrahamic Covenant. Abraham took 6 encounters, right, to get them all, okay? You collate them all and you make a list, okay, here's all the provisions of the Abrahamic Covenant, okay? You get the Reader's Digest version with Isaac here. You get the greatest hits of what the Abrahamic Covenant is. I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, give all your descendants all these lands. It's the second time he's mentioned that in 2 verses. You know, when you see repetition, it's for emphasis. Well, that's why God called Abraham about to sacrifice his son in 22. Abraham, Abraham. Emphasis. I am calling you. All right? None other. You're the only Abraham here. Okay. You will be given all these lands. Your descendants will be given all these lands. And by your descendants, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. See, that's why I had a problem. One of the reasons I had a problem with Paul. and his argument in Galatians 3:16. It very clearly is talking about the Jewish nation will be the blessing for the nations on the earth. But again, didn't see the cleverness of the rabbi's logic that just because a word can, have a nuance, that can mean that it doesn't mean that it doesn't have the nuance of the singular. That's the beauty of this word zerah, this beauty of this word seed, because implicit in the collective is the individual. Well, because Abraham obeyed me and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, my laws, to which you say, well, what commandments, statutes, and laws were? Torah wasn't given yet. Mount Sinai had not yet been, was not yet a thing for the Jewish people. Nonetheless, what God had directed Abraham to do, Abraham did. He was obedient up to and including being willing to sacrifice his son. So you are, in a sense, Isaac, you are coasting on the inheritance of the one who preceded you, right? There is a level of grace and merit that your father has accumulated. He's got good credit in my bank, and you as his son, you get that same line of credit that your father Abraham did, right? And I expect great things of you, just as I saw great things from Abraham. Implicit here is I expect great things from you as well. And God, I don't think, was disappointed. Now, we see Isaac in 22, married to Rebekah at this point, having a quarrel over wells, right? And in verse 24, the Lord appeared to him. The Lord appeared to him the same night and said, I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear. I saw do not fear. I've seen that before, Genesis 15. Do not fear. I am with you. Again, that commitment to specifically be your God in relationship. I will be with you in a unique and intimate way. I will bless you and multiply your descendants. Again, don't get too haughty here, because this is for the sake of my servant Abraham. Why did God choose Isaac? Because he is the descendant of Abraham. Why Isaac over Esau? God's sovereign choice. Why did God choose Abraham? Again, God's sovereign choice. He made the choice. We don't question the choice. We just recognize that the choice has implications, right? There are practical outworkings to God's sovereign choice regarding blessing, and Isaac is going to be well blessed because of God's faithfulness. So, regarding the multiply your descendants, you've already had the I will give you the land, so you have the promise of the land. Now you have the seed. You also have the blessing. And you also, in these two paragraphs, you have the relationship, the promise of intimate relationship. We move on to the grandson now. But the grandson has to receive the understanding of the father, of the son, of Isaac. And so you know the story of Jacob, phony baloney, con man, whatever. He steals the blessing that belongs to Esau. Well, Isaac says to Jacob, see the smell of my son, like the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. Now may God give you the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth, the abundance of grain and wine. May people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be master of your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be those who curse you, and blessed be those who bless you. We've seen that one. That's Genesis 12:3, right? Retributive justice. May the world, as it relates to you, God will relate to them. Right? Now, Jacob has to leave. Short story. Right? Making a long story short. And we're in chapter 28. Jacob departed from Beersheba, went toward Haran. Now that's an interesting thing because we know that Abraham, his grandfather, came from Ur, hung out in Haran until his father had passed away, and then moved to Canaan in obedience to the Lord. So Jacob's going backwards. Okay, going backwards. Came to a certain place, spent the night there, because the sun had set. Sounds like a reasonable plan. And he took one of the stones to the place and put it under his head. Sounds lumpy. And laid down in that place. He had a dream. He's dreaming of a comfortable pillow. No, that's not what the dream was. He had a dream, and behold, a ladder was set on the earth with its top reaching to heaven. Behold, the angels of God ascending and descending upon it. And behold, the Lord stood above it. It says, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. It doesn't say the God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, because it's still negotiating that deal. Okay? That deal's not a done deal yet. Okay? The land on which you lie, lumpy pillow and all, I will give it to you and to your descendants. And here we have confirmation that what Jacob attempted to steal and defraud, God was giving him anyway. Belonged to him all along. I give it to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth. Genesis 13. And you will spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and the south. That which I made your father walk around with. He'll walk to the north, the west, the east. Okay, your descendants will actually accomplish. They will fulfill the promise inherent in Abraham's stroll. Okay. And in you and in your descendants, in your seed, shall all the families, all the nations, all the peoples of the earth will be blessed. So, again, not just the reiteration of the land, of the seed, and the personal blessing, but the implicit promise that through your descendants, the earth will be affected. The world, all those neighbors, all those peoples around you. God hasn't forgotten them, nor has God narrowed his focus so profoundly that he has no more room to pay attention to those who are around the Jewish people. Just because the Jewish people wind up being the chosen people doesn't mean that God is ignoring the rest of the earth. It's baked in before the Torah is even given, before the Jewish people are officially, the Israelites are officially called the chosen people in Exodus 19. We see that God remembers the nations, remembers the people, Jews and non-Jews, in interaction together, in harmony together, activates a blessing. Can't bless somebody, you can't be a blessing to somebody from a distance, although there are some son-in-laws who will take issue with me on that. But you can't bless somebody and be a blessing to them from a distance. It requires relationship. So, again, from the beginning, the Jews, the Gentiles, the Jewish people, the instruments of God's blessing to the world Behold, verse 15, I'm with you, and I will keep you wherever you will go. Deep, intimate relationship. I am your personal God, and you will have a personal relationship with me. And I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. And Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, I got a headache. That was a really tough sleep. No, he says, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. Jacob is on a journey of discovery to understand what his family pedigree is, what his inheritance truly is. We're introduced to Jacob, and it's all about, well, will Jacob get the inheritance of his brother? What kind of inheritance is Jacob going to get? And what is he going to have to manipulate? Whatever. Jacob is only now beginning to understand the true implications of the heritage that he has because of his family pedigree. And finally, we get to Jacob's understanding. Jacob in 32, he's afraid of Esau. He's about to meet up with Esau again, and for right reasons he's afraid. And this is Jacob's insight, the insight to Jacob's psychology here. Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac. You see, Jacob begins to own the personal relationship that God had promised him and established him. God of my father Abraham, God of my father, I am ready to take on family responsibilities. O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your relatives, and I will prosper you. The journey is deepening until we get to the end of the chapter and we see it come to a head. What is Jacob's ultimate relationship through the Abrahamic Covenant with God and to the Abrahamic Covenant? And you have this wrestling match that occurs at the end of the chapter. A man, quote unquote, wrestled with him until daybreak. When he saw he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh. So the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while he wrestled with him. Some might say, hey, that's playing unfair advantage. And he said, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. God's already blessed him. What are you looking for, Jacob? What is your understanding here? Your understanding is incomplete. So God says to him, or the man, the wrestler, says to him, what is your name? Didn't know who he's wrestling with? Of course he knew. Jacob said, Jacob, Yaakov. And he said, your name will no longer be Yaakov, Jacob. It will be Israel. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. Israel, he who wrestles with God, the one who wrestles with God. And from that point on, the Jewish people are primarily known as Israel. Every now and then, for variety of sake, you get the nation called Jacob, right? But we're not Jacobites, right? Jacob is just basically to break it up, okay? Predominantly, Israel, the Jewish people are known as the ones who wrestle with God. All right, finally in verse 35. Chapter 35, rather. We have the sequel to that. In case apparently Jacob had a short-term memory, or maybe he got knocked in the head, not only in the thigh but in the head, and he needed to have this lesson of his renaming reiterated. So God appears to Jacob again when he came from Paddan Aram, and he blessed him. So you don't have to demand the blessing of God. If God intends to bless you, no amount of demanding is going to change his mind. God always intended to bless Jacob, wanted to make sure Jacob and he were on the same page. And God said to him, your name is Jacob, Yaakov. You shall no longer be called Jacob. Israel shall be your name. Remember when I said that to you originally? Yeah? Okay. And he called him Israel. Thus he called him Israel. And God said to him, oh my goodness, here we go. I am El Shaddai. Where have we seen that? Genesis chapter 15. I am El Shaddai. The God of fertility, the emphasis being on I'm in charge of your reproductive system, I'm in charge of your fertility, your fecundity, and all of your descendants. I'm watching and I'm in control. I'm God Almighty, be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, Genesis 17. And kings, Genesis 17, shall come forth from you. The land which I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I will give it to you, and I will give the land to your descendants after you. So we see in several encounters, Abraham receives the Abrahamic covenant. And then in additional encounters, Isaac receives the next baton, gets passed down to him. And in more encounters than it took his father Isaac, we see Jacob and the Lord having discussions and even getting down and dirty and wrestling together to get the point across. The Abrahamic covenant goes from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob and to his descendants thereafter. So what is the relationship? I've got just a few minutes. What is the relationship of the Abrahamic covenant to the remainder of the covenants, the rest of the covenants? Well, let's just take a few covenants one by one by one. What's the relationship of the Abrahamic covenant to the Noahic covenant? None. Okay, none. The Noahic covenant precedes the Abrahamic covenant. It's a covenant that's made with Noah and with all the inhabitants of the earth, including the animal kingdom as well. I don't remember if the fishies are included in that, but I know all the beasts are. And it's one of the issues this month, especially that gets my goat, because we see the beautiful sign of the Noahic covenant stolen, preempted by another group, and the concept, the sin of pride. So it's doubling down. You're really going to get down. If you're going to steal this from the Lord's covenant, and you're going to associate not only abominable behavior, but you're also going to assign to it the great theme of pride, one of the 7 deadly sins. So good luck with that. And good luck to our nation for recognizing this. I think, well, maybe, sometimes you live long enough and you say, I've seen everything, right? Okay. Well, apparently we haven't seen everything. I anticipate sometime in the next decade, maybe August, nothing's really going down and on. You got June, okay, Pride Month, okay, you got Black History Month in February, you got certain things going on, okay, but July, you got the Independence Day, you got something going on. But August, nothing's ever going on in August, okay? I anticipate in the future we're going to have Adultery Month. Month dedicated all to adultery. And then October, okay, we're going to have a sign to sloth, okay? This is the month where our nation is going to celebrate sloth. I can't wait to see which symbols are going to be stolen from the Scripture and from God to illustrate those. But anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get carried away there. So going forward from the Abrahamic covenant, the next covenant which we see is the Mosaic covenant. The Mosaic covenant assumes the Abrahamic covenant. Okay, the Abrahamic covenant is the foundational presupposition from which the Mosaic covenant can be granted. The Mosaic covenant, in a sense, is attached to the Abrahamic, but it doesn't rest upon the Abrahamic covenant. If we think about everything that happens in Exodus and all the way through through Joshua. Okay, it's all dependent on the Abrahamic covenant. Everything that happens, and you see even from the beginning of Exodus, with the children of Israel being enslaved and God remembering to be faithful to His people because of the promises of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And every time God identifies Himself from the end of Genesis all the way through the rest of the books of Moses, He's always identified as, I'm the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Which, when we see that formula, by the way, when you see that formula in Scripture, throughout Scripture, and you see it a whole lot, not just in the Mosaic Code and the Torah, but you see it in the history, and you see it in the writings as well. You see it throughout the Hebrew Bible, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That is a shout out, that is a call out to the Abrahamic covenant. That is the shadow of the Abrahamic covenant, in other words, looms large over the actions, the events, the questions, the issues, the conversations, the realities of the rest of the Hebrew Scripture, all the way until we get to the New Testament. But we're going to get there in a moment. So the Mosaic covenant is a way it's a way to establish the relationship between a people who had already been called out through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to relate to God in the land that He had promised the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to enjoy. Now, as a people, the relationship of the people to the land is based upon the Abrahamic covenant. However, individual generations, the relationship of whether they get to enjoy their possession of Abrahamic covenant, unconditional. The Jewish people have the land is theirs, okay? But whether they get to enjoy that land is dependent upon the Mosaic covenant and their faithfulness to it, right? Deuteronomy 28, we have all of those promises, blessings. And then on a 4-to-1 basis of blessings to curses, you have that list of curses. The land will vomit you out if you disobey. Just as the sin of the Amorite had not yet reached this, there'll be a certain point when the sin of the chosen people, the sin of the Jewish people, the Israelites, will reach a certain point, and God will say, sorry, you have now activated, you've initiated the curses of Deuteronomy 28, and based upon your enjoyment of the land, you don't get to enjoy that. Okay, a future generation, other generations get to return, enjoy it, and then they remove, they return, depending on their fidelity to the Mosaic law. So again, possession of the land, ownership of the land, that's a constant, unconditional, always. Enjoyment of the land predicated upon obedience to the Mosaic covenant. Okay, we have the Davidic covenant, the promise of the Messiah. Promise of the Messiah is something that actually predates David. It goes all the way back to Genesis, and we get very specific in Genesis, and none other than Jacob himself. Jacob, that old rascal, who it took a little while for him to step up and understand his role and responsibility as the inheritor of the Abrahamic covenant. But nonetheless, on his deathbed, he speaks in chapter 49, he speaks of the Messiah, the future scepter, the future ruler coming from Judah, from the fourth son, from the fourth tribe. And so we say, and Jacob is giving prophecy. That chapter 49, that deathbed confession of Jacob in chapter 49, it is identified right at the outset as this is prophecy. Jacob is telling them of things that will be. That's prophecy, right? And so we know that the Messiah is going to be coming from Judah. We see in the Davidic covenant that God will establish a relationship between David's progeny, same concept, okay? And it's ambiguous as to how long, how many descendants we're going to have to wait till we see the ultimate descendant who will receive all the blessings and fulfill the promises and the hope of the Davidic covenant. But we know that when he does come, it will require somebody to have an eternal kingdom, an unshakable kingdom, and an eternal undying throne. right? So it will require, if you think how it's going to actually work out, it requires an immortal descendant. That's a little bit ambiguous in the Hebrew Bible. Becomes much clearer once we hit Matthew and thereafter. So we move from the Davidic covenant. Well, let's take a left turn back because I did forget one. That's the land covenant. Used to be called in ages back, before it was politically incorrect to say this, it was called the Palestinian covenant. Now the Palestinians have their own covenant, speaking of the destruction of the Jewish people and driving the Jewish people into the sea. So I do not use that term anymore. I speak of the land covenant. The land covenant actually comes right after the curses and the blessings of Deuteronomy 28. Starts in 29 and goes all the way through most of 30. And it's easy to lose track of the land covenant because it's at the end of a very long Mosaic covenant, and it could actually very easily, you could see it being subsumed inside the Mosaic covenant, except for the fact that chapter 29, verse 1 begins so very clearly, here is the covenant that God made with the Jewish people in Moab, in addition to, or beside, the covenant God made with their fathers at Sinai. Okay, so you have the introduction, and if you're not reading carefully, you can just glass right over it. Okay, and the point of the land covenant is to bring us back to the Abrahamic covenant. The land covenant is actually alongside the Mosaic covenant, but while the Mosaic covenant has a foot on the Abrahamic covenant, the land covenant is solidly rooted in the Abrahamic covenant, because the land covenant is all about not if you mess up, but I know you are going to blow it. I know my people. And I know that you're going to blow it. And in fact, you're going to initiate not just the introductory curses, but you're going to blow through the entire chapter of curses because of your unfaithfulness to me. But even though you are unfaithful to me, I will never be unfaithful to you. Remember, covenantal ideal. I am your God, you will be my people. And while your enjoyment of the land is predicated on your faithfulness to the Mosaic covenant, your ownership of the land is based upon my promises found in the Abrahamic covenant. And so I will bring you back. I will circumcise your heart. You will return to me. I will circumcise your heart. Nobody can perform open heart surgery on their own cells, right? I wouldn't recommend it, right? And so no one can perform their own open heart surgery. So too, God is going to perform open heart surgery, remove the callousness, and open give them a heart of flesh, not a heart of stone, and bring them back to their land and establish himself as the true God of his people. I am your God, you will be my people. That will finally be realized. So that's the Mosaic covenant, that's the Davidic covenant, that is the Davidic covenant, and now we come to the new covenant. And we're all familiar with the new covenant, right? Jesus said to his disciples, hey, this cup, the third cup of the Passover Seder, cup of redemption, this is the new covenant. And it's ratified, poured out, okay, in my blood. It's ratified in my blood. Because every covenant needs ratification, right? When the Mosaic covenant, for example, was ratified, okay, Moses took animals, sacrificed the animals, and then went on a sprinkle fast, okay, and sprinkled half the blood of the animals on the people, half the blood here, so blood. And so it's not surprising that the new covenant needs to be ratified with blood. It's just whose blood and which blood. That's surprising. But this is the new covenant in my blood, poured out for the many, right? Who are the many? The Jewish people there at the meal, which is everyone, they would have heard the many. Okay, so all of Israel, right? Jacob, Israel. But it will take them 7 more years to really get the idea that it extends far beyond just the Jewish people, and that the blessing of the new covenant is extended to all the families of the earth, and that Gentiles come to faith, and Gentiles are accepted by God in just the same way as Jewish people are, which is by grace through faith in the Messiah, plus bupkis, plus nothing. Right? And it's for the forgiveness of sin. So the new covenant is very, very clear. You have to be careful with the new covenant because so many people, because of what Jesus said, they just assume without carefully reading the texts on which discuss the new covenant, they believe that, well, because Jesus said this is poured out for the many, that the new covenant must have been made with the world, like Noah or something, the Noahic covenant, and it's not. It's a new covenant, just like the Abrahamic covenant is made with the house of Jacob, the house of Israel, is made with the Jewish people. And the provisions of the new covenant include certain hard facts on the ground, like the restoration of the people to their land, the rebuilding of Jerusalem, the return of the people to the land, and never again experiencing doubt and distress from their enemies. In other words, an unprecedented era of perfect security and peace and shalom and agricultural fecundity and success and fertility and so many beautiful things the Jewish people through the new covenant receive the outworkings of the blessings that were promised to the Jewish people in the Abrahamic covenant. But in so too do Gentiles receive the outworkings of that which was promised in a very ambiguous way. Is there anything more ambiguous that in you all the families of the earth will be blessed? Blessed in what way? Will each receive mink stoles? I mean, everybody's going to get a Cadillac? Blessed in what way? We see through the new covenant how the outworking of the blessing, that God puts his laws within them. He writes them on our hearts. He does that open heart surgery, which he promised the Jewish people would receive in Deuteronomy, and which the nation as a whole will receive in the future, whereas right now only a remnant have received that open heart surgery, that exchange of a heart of flesh for a heart of stone, as Ezekiel points out so beautifully. But we receive the Spirit, and we receive forgiveness of sins, and the knowledge of God is internal to us. And that covenantal ideal shows its face again. I will be your God, and you will be my people. So important is the new covenant, of course, that not only is Jesus explaining that he ratifies that covenant with his own blood, but the author of Hebrews devotes an entire chapter, and actually it's the longest quoted passage of the Hebrew Bible in the New Testament. And if you think about it, most people don't think about it because we live in the printing press era and a word processing era. But if you think about the stinginess of literary real estate, the limitations of what a scroll could actually, or a letter written on a scroll could actually contain, to take a giant portion of that scroll and devote it to a quotation, which most of the readers would have already known and be able to quote by heart. See, that's why you see so many times in Paul and in various other writings in the New Testament, when they're quoting the Old Testament, they don't give you a big giant block quote because they assume a certain level of biblical knowledge and literacy among their audience, that all they need is the first line or the first phrase or an image from the quotation, and they assume the audience will fill that in. Whereas the author of Hebrews, he knows that they can quote the prophet Jeremiah 31 through 34. But it's so important that he writes it out anyway. So the new covenant is absolutely directly laid on the foundation of the Abrahamic covenant. All right, well, it's 7 minutes. Afternoon. I have 3 minutes I'll take for questions, and that's it. 3 minutes. Any questions that remain? 3 minutes. Okay. Because I know the first question is always awkward, let's throw that one out and let's go to the second question. Okay. Do I have a second question I hope it's better than the first one. Okay. Yes.